Recording. Hey guys, welcome back to the Grief and Loss program. We have this lovely woman with us. I'm gonna let you introduce yourself because you're
Okay.
gonna do the best. But I just want to say thank you guys for coming on and jumping on with us today. You can find us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. You can look us up. Find out more about us and what we do. I'll give it to you.
Thank you, love. Thank you so much for the opportunity. My name is Nicole Lee. I serve as a certified trauma informed coach, healer, and retreat host. And I support individuals who are going through life transitions that are looking to rediscover who they are, heal their inner wounds, and really create a life that they love. My specialty is in identity clarity, grief and trauma healing and recovery, as well as purpose alignment and clarity as well.
Yay! And we're so glad
Yay.
to have you on here. So if you want to start and just give us what you do, your
Mhm.
story, that would be
Sure. Yeah, so I think since we're talking about the topic of grief, I will start with how I even became more connected to grief and the grief journey. My mother was diagnosed with cancer in May of 2018, and my mother passed away September 22nd of 2018. So you can imagine how you have someone who's super healthy, everything seems fine, and the next thing you know, you no longer have my mother was my best friend, and so
Mhm.
that was though I had dealt with other losses and lost other loved ones along the way, it was nothing like losing my mom, and it really did shake me at the core. I now what I know more about grief and just what happens in our bodies, like we go through shock and we have what's called threat responses or fight or flight, and I can talk about that a little bit later, but I was basically going through all of those things and I just didn't even know what it was. I mean,
Mhm.
many times we think of grief, we think of being sad or confused, but we don't really know what's actually happening within our bodies. And so I had everything from brain fog to mood swings to my body was out of alignment. And I had what I would consider an awakening. I really was not the same physically, mentally, and spiritually as a result of my mother dying. And so over a course of a few years, I went on a self-discovery journey. I was working in corporate America. I was a corporate executive in business management consulting. And so went back to work. Things didn't feel quite right, but I could not explain it. And then in the midst of COVID, 2020, I mean, we had everything from COVID, Black Lives Matter, a lot of things occurring. That my mother came to me. I do believe in divine messages from the other side. And my mother came to me and told me to quit my job, my career, and I know most people have that same shock, like, "What? Whoa," right? That's it. Because people say, "How did the heck did you transition?" And I'm like, "Well, I was meditating." She
Mhm.
came and said, "Quit." And my best friend at the time was actually here because we were quarantining together. And I came out that morning. I just said, "Good morning." We're crossing the banister or whatever in the morning. I said, "Good morning." I was like, my mom came to me and I think I'm gonna quit my job. Now I've known my friend, I've known her for over 20 years. So she's like, okay, right? Really want to be supportive, but the same eyeballs are like, okay. And it's COVID, and like, I mean, it's all the things. And so really a couple weeks later, I resigned.
Mhm.
And I stayed as a consultant with the firm I was with, so I went from being an employee to a contractor, and I really took the true leap of faith in 2021. And I did not know what I was going to do. I did not have the plan. I did not follow what the typical protocol is of, you don't leap before you have a plan, none of that. This was truly a divine leap of faith. And so I went through everything of self-discovery. I was going to therapists, healers, doing all the things. And I also became certified in a lot of modalities because there was a heightened interest to really understand who we are at the core. Taking care of my mother and realizing how the Western medical system really didn't look at us holistically. it really piqued my interest. And so that's why I became certified as a health coach. It's why I went into energy medicine. It's why I went into hypnotherapy and meditation. And so that activation, that awakening really created a curiosity within myself, but also in the world. So it really did pique me, have create a different perspective and a peak interest in who we are as people, like holistically. And so through that journey of trial and error, through my own experiences, I was coaching part time through that coaching, healing as I continued to gain modalities in that process. And it really was like this year that I really felt that I needed to focus a lot more in the grief space
Mm,
because as I helped clients with their life transitions and the things that they were going through, whether it was career or personal, it really dawned on me how much we skip the grief conversation.
mm,
Because if it's not tied to the loss of a loved one, we really don't look at all the losses and
mm,
the parts of us that we're grieving or people or situations. And so, as I reflected on my own journey, and then I reflected on clients that I was working with, as I started to look at more things in social media, books that were written, just a lot of content, a lot was just mostly tied to death, right? Like
mm,
loss of a loved
yeah.
one. And so, that's what really shifted me into doing more of this work and also being trauma informed, recognizing there was a bit of a dance between those two. And
Mhm,
often, even in trauma, we talk about the traumatic experiences and what's happening with us. But so often we don't ask what we actually lost in that process, right?
mm,
Did I lose stability? Did I lose faith? Did I lose freedom? Did I lose safety? Right? Am
mm,
I grieving a expectation of the relationship? Am I
yeah,
grieving now the way my life looks differently from that perspective? So that's really what brought me to where I am today and my deep desire to help individuals see grief from a broader view and recognizing that where there might be actual challenges in overcoming challenges and traumas is because there's unprocessed grief that we haven't worked through.
mm. Man, that's a lot.
Mhm.
That's a lot. Can you unpack the part where it's not just loss, but it's
Mhm.
also just letting go of the expectations of relationships and stuff? Can you talk more about that?
Yeah. So oftentimes again, and I'm sure you can attest to this, we think of grief as loss of a loved one or even sometimes loss of a pet, but something that is living, right? That
Mhm,
we lose. But when it comes to loss, there are several different types of losses that can bring upon grief. Even estranged relationships, the
mhm,
loss of a relationship with someone, divorce, separation, change in friendships,
mhm,
loss of a job, which we overlook a lot. People get laid
mhm,
off and we just think, "Go back into the job pool." There's grief in that, okay?
mhm,
Even retirement. So even if you're choosing to make a change, there can still be grief. So a situation like mine, I chose to leave my job, but I didn't realize that I was actually grieving that
mhm,
identity in the process.
mhm,
I had 20 years of an identity of what my career was, how I described myself, and that was no longer going to be. The
mm,
relationships that I was going to have were changing.
mm,
How I was able to communicate and show up in the world was changing.
yeah,
Those are all losses, and those all can come with grief. If you
mm,
look at example, we just went through an election, okay? In regards to what side you were on, but if you were on the side that you desired that Kamala or someone else other than Trump was going to win, the perception of elements of loss tied to freedom, tied to
mm,
stability, tied to
mm,
independence, tied to justice can bring upon grief.
mm. That's
So
crazy.
that's a prime example of one that gets overlooked quite often. A life
Mm,
event. We have more access on social media to life events all over. We have the
mm,
the Gaza event, Pakistan. We have, there's so many things going on in the world that people don't realize that they're also grieving that, even though they weren't part of the experience, does
Mm,
not mean that you aren't taking on some of that grief.
yeah, yeah.
So those
Wow.
are just, I mean, there's several ones, but those are just some of the examples of things that sometimes when we just overlook and we don't say, you know what, are you grieving that? I mean, just I talked about
Right.
Black Lives Matter, and a huge one is COVID.
Mhm. Man.
Right? Like, you think of not just, again, loss of loved one, loss of security, loss of control, loss of freedom, loss of the known, just
Yikes.
right, that we just said, "You know what? We're back to normal now. Just go back to work or go back to your regularly scheduled program." And most people experience PTSD and grief, and we just said, "Good luck."
Yeah, yeah. I know plenty of people who are now disoriented, and they
Mhm,
don't quite know they haven't healed. Like, it's just like
mhm,
they're still kinda not sure of what to do. They didn't go back into the workforce, and
mhm.
everyone's just like, "What is wrong with you?" Everyone's, kinda like, "Okay, when are you going to?" And
Yeah.
it's that weird process, and I think it's awesome if they heard about this. And also, like, what are the ways that they can know that they're grieving? Because I think some people would be watching, and they'd be just like, "You know what? I don't know if I fall into that category." What are some ways that they can be like, "Oh, no, that's me?"
Yeah, so there are several different, and this is where it does get very interesting because a lot of symptoms, just like if you had a cold, there are symptoms that can look like the flu, look like the cold, look
Mm,
like allergies. So one big thing I will say is, being cautious of self-diagnosing and making sure, right, that you're checking in and things of that nature. But there are some things of if you see major, so I mentioned I had mood swings, major shift in my behavior that
mm,
wasn't common is a very common one. If you're going through major ebbs and flows of your emotions, and
mhm,
there's typically tied to an event. So many times, if we look at the description from depression, depression is usually tied to when you cannot tie it to something, where
mm,
you're just not feeling well, but you can't tie it to something.
mm,
Typically, grief is tied to something, an event, a person, a circumstance. So if you can connect and say, you know what, I I moved, just something simple. I just moved from Atlanta to California. And then I just noticed that my mood is off. I'm not sleeping well. My digestion is off.
mm,
Um, I may be having brain fog, or maybe I'm feeling
mm,
anxious. Some of those are signs and symptoms because we don't realize, again, you've lost while you're, even though you may have moved and you wanted to move, the
mm,
loss of connection, the loss of routine, the
mm,
loss of relationships, those types of things can bring about those similar symptoms. So I would go with, have you gone through some type of life event and you're noticing that your behavior, your thoughts and emotions are altered as a result? More
mhm.
than likely there's some element of grief that's tied to it.
Man. Okay, yeah, that's good.
Mhm.
I like that because I think that's really applicable for anyone
Mhm.
who's just trying to figure out what they're going through.
Yeah, and I think like we say, like, I think the thing that, one of the biggest things is being more present and aware in our lives, and so one of the things that even when I'm working with clients or even friends, if you start seeing something shift, asking like, "Did something happen?
Mm,
Can I correlate how I was feeling here to there? Did something happen?" Yes. Am I feeling different
mhm,
internally as a result? Yes. Am I feeling sad, or am I feeling, a big thing is better understanding your emotions. And then are you feeling something different in your body? So that's a many times that we overlook that. So for example, I never experienced panic attacks. When
mm,
my mother died, I was having panic attacks. I could not
mm,
explain what was happening because I didn't correlate losing my mom, that it could
mhm,
create a fight or flight in my body, which is, so your nervous system, that when they call it the fight or flight, is when your nervous system is not feeling safe, okay? When your body's
mm,
not feeling safe. And so that can create the anxiousness, the panic attacks and things of that nature. Knowing what I know now, I know there's a correlation, but many times because we aren't asked like, "Hey, is something changing in our body?" Yes.
mm.
Did something just happen recent in your life? Yes. It could very well be tied to grief. So I'll give
Mm,
you a prime example because I know applicable things that feel more applicable. I was meeting with a friend and they're heavy into health and wellness and they're like, "You know what? I am all of a sudden I have high blood pressure. Like
mm,
nothing changed in my diet. Everything's fine. My blood pressure's up. I'm not sleeping well." And I was like, "Did something happen recently that's really shaking you up?" They were getting divorced.
mm, that's it.
And I said, so if we look at when you really realize that the relationship was no longer going to work, can you connect back to those feelings like, oh my gosh, that's
Mm,
it?
mm,
Then they had to move from their home as a result. So they were losing
mm,
their home that they were comfortable with. So the doctor was going to put them on high blood pressure medication
mm-mm.
because they didn't ask if some major life event had happened that
Yeah.
might have been altering their sense of safety in their body. Prime
Mm,
example. So we started working through what's the grief? What does it feel like? What feels incomplete? What's been unsaid about this situation? What are you doing inside your body? Meditation, breathing, and things of that nature to get her body back on track.
wow. Wow.
So this is why I say just being more aware and just asking, is there something that's happened? And can I tell that something's off and it's
Right.
tied to some event? Yeah. I mean, at the core, in my opinion, from doing this work, at the core of where I feel most people are suffering is because it's unprocessed grief and not having containers and spaces that people hold space for you to talk about something. I talked with someone else recently that something happened 20 years ago and people were telling them you need to move forward, you need to get over it. I'm sorry, the way the body works, it holds on to memories and imprints, and if we don't bring that and recall it and release it, we carry it. So I feel like people are carrying literally 2 backpacks, a trauma one and a grief one,
Oh, man.
and you wonder why you're feeling heavy in your body. You wonder why you're exhausted
Mhm,
because you're carrying these things. If you've been on earth more than 20 years and you
mhm.
haven't taken that time to release, then you're carrying those things.
Man. Man, I mean, that's like all Americans, like, that's just the
Yes.
whole entire
That's the word. That's like for mostly the world, like, yeah. Yeah, but it's and that's a valid point, right? Like, when we really think about the way things have been structured, it is not creating this opportunity to really have a level of self-awareness of mind and body, and depending on what your spiritual beliefs are, to be more aware of what's happening inside of us and events that could be influencing that, right?
Yeah,
And yeah, that's just been my observation and why I have so much passion in this because now I ask folks, right? Like when you're doing your gratitude journals, because we know gratitude is so important, is there something you're grieving?
mhm,
Grief and gratitude can coexist, and often
mm,
they do.
mm,
So that's something practical I would invite anyone is to just close your eyes, breathe in, and say, is there something I'm still grieving?
yeah,
Is there something I may still be holding on to? While also still being grateful for all the beautiful things that are happening in your life. Because if
mhm,
we don't allow those things to surface, we can't clear them and we can't continue to move forward at the level of I would say power and energy that we would like to.
yeah, yeah, I completely agree, and it's just so sad that, because I haven't heard of, like, energies and just
Mhm.
making sure that you're grieving internally, like, it's
Mhm.
just like and then, it's not even just loss, it's also, just like you said, safety and everything,
Mhm.
it just because I haven't heard of it, I'm just like, this is what people need, and if I
Mhm.
haven't heard of it, I know a lot of other people haven't heard of it, and so I'm
Yeah.
just like, so how do people get that information or, like, where do they go?
Yeah, one thing I meant to bring up too that was very insightful for me of a different perspective around grief was the grief recovery method.
Mm,
So they're an organization. I think they've been around for 30 years
okay.
and they actually have a download and I'm happy to send the link, but they have a download you can get around like the 50 something things around grief or something like that. And that's what actually opened my eyes to the different types of grief, tangible, intangible grief. And so I
Mhm,
think that's a great place to start as well because it connects the dots. The other thing about the grief recovery method that's really powerful to me is it's not about coping, it's actually about recovering. So if you
Mm,
think about a lot of things around coping, coping are temporary mechanisms to help you just stabilize in the moment.
mm,
Recovery is truly getting through, right? Getting to a place that you can move through life differently.
I
So
see.
it's very fascinating to me that they use that language because it really says I can recover from this, and it really gave me a greater sense of empowerment
Yeah,
around my grief.
yeah,
I was of the mindset that, I must potentially carry some of this pain because that's the only way I can stay connected to my mother, right? Like
mhm,
if I don't feel it so deeply, if I don't break down, then I must be losing the connection to my mother. The
mhm,
reality is I can release the pain and remember
mm,
her, right?
mm,
I can remember who she is and all the things tied to it while also releasing the pain.
mhm,
The person's physical, then we're talking about death in this case, the person's physical body is no longer here, but the essence of who they are always remains.
yeah,
And so that's one place I invite individuals. They have programs, they have groups, but they were really groundbreaking to me and how they look at grief and breaking
mhm.
some of the myths and perceptions and perspectives. Particularly the coping versus recovery was really powerful to me.
Yeah, that's a hard one because me and my girlfriends were always just like, "Okay, how are you coping?"
Mhm.
And so it's like a total re-education on the
Mhm.
fact that coping isn't recovery.
Yeah.
And it's crazy. I mean, makes sense definition-wise,
Yeah.
but just culturally, everyone's just like, "Okay, cope. This is how you
Mhm.
cope. These are 25 ways to cope." And it's just like,
Yeah.
it's Band-Aids.
Yeah. And see, this is what's so powerful too, right? Is that this is why I always say about awareness. How we get into even habits, our unconscious behaviors. At some point, we are able to just brush our teeth without thinking, right? It's help for efficiency and effectiveness, etc. However, we're creatures that we will then take on and subscribe to previous traditions, beliefs, thought process, etc. And if we aren't actually being curious about whether it fits with us or not, we just start using the language. We just start using the words. We just start repeating and regurgitating things that we heard before. And so one of the things too that I think is really powerful, what I've done with myself and what I recommend with others is becoming curious, not in judgment, right? But why
Mhm,
why am I using that language? So a big thing for me is I start looking up definitions. I start
mhm,
looking up, things around like how we've been using words. And so
mhm,
to your point, we don't realize that we got into the habit of using the word cope, and
mhm.
coping literally is a temporary resolve,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so, again, to your point, it's like, why do I want to cope or do I want to fully heal? Do I
Yeah.
want to cope or do I want to recover?
Mhm,
And again, this is where, like you were saying, of like, when we start looking at asking these questions of like, I actually want to recover. Right? I actually want to get to, and again, this doesn't mean that I don't have emotions. This doesn't mean that, I won't have a moment. However, when you look at loss at a grand scale, and this is where I feel I'm a bit disruptive, is that if we believe that we're going to always grieve, then we
mhm,
will stay in a grief cycle.
most
Okay?
time.
Because if we look past just losing a loved one, we're always losing things. Okay?
Yes,
Because we're always going through life changes. So
yeah,
to tell us, again, this is just my perspective and what's liberated me, for
mhm,
me to believe that I actually have to hold on to grief means that I'm
mhm,
just going to keep packing it on. So
yeah,
for it to say you can never escape it. I've heard people say this, you can never escape grief.
mm,
What I would say is recognizing that grief is part of life, but
mhm,
how you decide to connect with it is
mm,
how you are able to liberate yourself and
mhm,
not hold it as a burden and as a blocker to the
mhm,
joy and happiness that you desire. That is the
mm,
that is the true difference in the choice, right? Happiness is going to come to me as well. I still get to decide how I embrace that happiness,
that's true. I love
right?
that.
So that's the other part, that just being mindful of certain words that I found that have created, I sense, greater suffering. And we don't realize that we're unconsciously creating suffering.
Yeah, Yeah.
right? Like, and I'm in like Facebook groups with people who are grieving. It's like it'll never be the same. Well,
Mm,
if the thought process, yes, but if we believe that we cannot recover, then it is a greater sense that your life was over at that part, that that major
mm,
loss occurred.
mm-mm.
So you do need to go through a process and go through the work. It's not to bypass it.
Right.
However, I believe, and this is part of why I desire this work, I want to be a testament, a
Mm,
testimony of what it means to say, I decide to recover and heal and live an even greater life as a result.
yes, yes, yes. I absolutely love that. How can people get in contact with you?
So I'm on all socials. So I am Nicole Leeds, Nicholelee. A lot of L's and a lot of E's. My parents weren't really thinking about maybe I'd start doing podcasts and have all the, and my middle name is Lena. So let's just look at all those L's and E's. But yes, I am Nicole Lee on Instagram, the same on LinkedIn. Um, I just started a YouTube channel, not much out there, but you can search for me out there as well. And anyone, you can, we'll drop my email address. Please send, I check all my DMs. So it is me, it's not a bot. But even feel free to just send me an email. One of my email addresses is probably the easiest to remember is you are loved at
Mm,
Nicole.love. Yep.
that is awesome. Oh my goodness. I love your perspective and
Oh,
I
thank
want
you.
more of you. I
Oh, thank
do. Because
you.
it's not just education, it's
Mm-hmm.
love in your
Mm-hmm.
messages.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, and I love that. I think people resonate with that more and they feel it. You know, it's like, man, I feel like I can tell her anything. And I think that's super important when it comes to grief and loss.
Thank you. Yeah, and I would just say before we close, one of the biggest thing that you just mentioned that I've learned on this journey, and I appreciate that you see it in me. If we don't lead with love, compassion, and understanding and creating spaces of safety, we cannot heal, right? And so much out here, there's a lot of content, there's a lot of data, there's a lot of education, but at the core of it, our issue is not access to information. Our issue
Mhm.
is access to love in spaces where we feel that we can be seen, loved, and heard. And so I appreciate that you felt that with me. My passion in education is important because I desire for everyone to be self empowered. My
Mm,
job is not to empower you. My job is to equip you so you feel empowered to live in your
mm,
truth and you
mm,
feel that you have the self agency and liberation to do so. So,
mm,
one thing I will just share before we close is you truly are the most magnificent gift, and everything that you have to offer to the world is needed. And
mm,
even through your journey of suffering, telling your story is a healing element for not only you and the world. So, when we're going through these challenges, whatever, whether it's sharing with someone, anonymously or writing it in a journal or wherever the case, expressing yourself is one of the most powerful things you can do to help you with your healing process. And so
mm.
I invite you in whatever way or shape or form that that serves you is ensuring that you express and release what is in you to come out.
I love that. Oh my goodness. I love that. Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much for
Thank you.
coming. Okay, guys, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will have the next one next week, Monday.
Thank
See you
you so
guys
much for
later.
having me.
Yay! And